Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Chrissy Hodges. I am a certified peer support specialist working with people worldwide as they are working toward recovery for OCD. I'm also an advocate, in particular for the community named Pure OCD, which is the community that has individuals with intrusive thoughts and mental rituals, and that just so happens to be the name of my memoir, Pure OCD, The Invisible Side of Obsessive Compulsive Disorder. I run 8-week closed groups. I also have an online community where each week you can get support through groups, one-on-one peer support. We have events and we have a forum that you can talk directly to a certified peer support specialist. Check me out at chrissyhodges.com or email me for more information. And also NoCD, NOCD is an app, and inside that app you can connect to other individuals. They have all kinds of resources as you're working toward recovery for OCD, and they also do telehealth, doing ERP in many places around the world. And if you want to schedule an assessment or find out more about them, go to treatmyocd.com. This is a little special edition, special version video today because I have my good friend and wonderful colleague, Mr. Jonny Say from England. Hello, Jonny.
Hi, Chrissy. Great to be with you.
Thank you for being here from all the way over the pond from America. And I'm very excited to talk to you today about a particular topic that you and I have had several discussions about, which is going to be real event, false memory, how childhood events can impact what you're going through right now in your own life, but also how it interacts with OCD. And you bring a particularly amazing form of emotional support, compassion to your practice and to your work and in a lot of your advocacy. So I thought you were the perfect person to talk to about. But first, I want to have you introduce yourself to the audience here on my YouTube channel.
Sure, sure. Yeah, I'm looking forward to talking about compassion for sure. Yeah, I'm Jonny Say. I'm a OCD therapist, and I do work in other areas as well, not just OCD. But we have a centre in the UK called the Integrative Centre for OCD Therapy, and that's a private OCD therapy centre with Stuart Ralph of OCD Stories, and we see lots of clients there with OCD, with this type of OCD and many other presentations. Yeah, I have my own lived history of OCD. I'm a big advocate for acceptance and commitment-based therapy and compassion-focused therapy alongside ERP. So yeah, we're very much working with Real Event, these types of presentations, and how important compassion really is for this. In fact, I'd say it's an essential part of recovery.
Before we get into it, I completely agree, but not everybody has, and not that not everybody has agreed with this, but this hasn't been a central focus to OCD therapy for a really long time. And I think it's definitely in the last 5 to 6, 7 years, we have talked more about compassion, the actual emotional experience of OCD, whereas before it has been very much, this is a disorder that can be treated behavior, 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 and
Mhm.
screw your emotions. And in fact, I even bought into a lot of that because that's what I knew about the disorder until I really started to go through some of the more emotional recovery, grief, anger, all of those things that I needed to go through. And compassion has been integral, even though hard to cultivate. What do you think the change has been in recent years that we really starting to look at bringing compassion, bringing self-compassion into treatment for OCD instead of it just being straight behavioral and get on with life?
Mm. Well, it's interesting to think about the history of it. I mean, in the UK, compassion focused therapy has been a big part of a lot of CBT therapists' practices, actually, because Paul Gilbert was sort of recognized as a real expert on depression primarily and developed compassion focused therapy out of cognitive behavioral therapy and has very much been connected with a lot of the CBT world in the UK. So I think it's had an influence in the UK for quite a long time. You know, I've worked in the National Health Service in the past, and lots of my CBT colleagues were integrating CFT in their compassion focused therapy and had been. I think in America, I mean, I'm no expert on the path, but it feels to me that some of the ERP therapists were, they were looking widely to see what could support ERP and third wave CBT, like acceptance commitment therapy and dialectical behavior therapy, things like that. They were starting to explore those as adjuncts, and they really emphasized compassion. So actors had compassion really at the core from the very beginning. And the anxiety book for ACT, written by my supervisor, actually, John Forsyth, had compassion built in, decades ago. They were doing that, or in the sort of early 2000s, I think it was. And then DBT, obviously, Marsha Linehan's had compassion in from the beginning. And then a lot of people started looking at Kristin Neff and Chris Germer's work. And I think that all influenced ERP and people like John Hirschfield and other, very experienced clinicians started bringing in self-compassion more overtly. So yeah, that's kind of how I see it having evolved. In the UK, some of the old guard for CBT sort of say, well, it's always been compassionate and this is nothing new. And, you get all that kind of resistance. But I think we've been zoning in on the processes of compassion more directly and the nuance of it. And actually, with something like this, like how do you be compassionate to yourself when you believe you've done something awful? And it's much more complicated or more nuanced than just I'm going to give myself a warm bath and start being, kind to myself.
Yes.
There's a lot more to it.
Yes, and that's a great segue. In from a lived experience, peer support perspective, I definitely have seen the change in the last several years. I think a lot is bringing the taboo, intrusive thoughts to the surface, really understanding the research around how there's a different level of shame that people deal with taboo intrusive thoughts that is going to require compassion and values-based treatment protocols in order for people to really engage in that behavioral therapy. So, um,
Yeah.
and this subject is no different. So let's just jump right in. Let me explain to the audience why I wanted to talk about this today. So I have, based on what I do a lot, which is supporting individuals who are living with OCD and working toward recovery, I hear so many stories from individuals around the world. And a lot of times those stories include things that can be real event, which we'll explain in a second, false memory, or actual memories. These are things that have happened in your life that are real things that have happened that maybe you reflect on with embarrassment, with shame, with I cannot believe that I did that. And what does that say about me that this happened? I'll give you some examples in a moment. But then when we have OCD, the degree to which OCD can latch on to these things, the real events that have happened, that now in your present life, you are constantly bombarded with I can never live a happy life knowing I did this. I do not deserve a happy life. How could I even be with someone if I know that I did this or this happened to me or that I thought this or I masturbated or had sex to this or I experienced something with a family member when I was younger or there's child's play or all these kind of things that now OCD has just wrapped its arms around and said, you are never getting out of this. And I'm going to torment you for the rest of your life based on this one thing that may have happened when you're 8, 4, 16, or 25, but something that now you're reflecting on. And it not only brings you shame and tormenting shame that cannot make you live in the present and move forward, but also OCD is saying, I'm going to even double down and say that you should because you're a horrible person. Basically, this is now the proof that I may be some deviant, that I may be some awful person, and my themes are real now, and I don't deserve happiness or to live a life, that involves any sort of joy or just deserving of anything in general. So, or I deserve self-punishment. I deserve to be punished. I cannot take joy in anything because I don't deserve it. So I hear these stories A lot. And a lot of it is because I'm talking about this more now on YouTube because it is so important and it's so much more common than I ever knew. From the moment I started talking about it, now I'm hearing so many more stories because it's safe to open up to someone like me, to someone like Jonny, to someone. To people who are going to listen to your stories and not, say the dreaded what you're scared of, you deserve this or you're horrible or, the police need to be called or whatever, because that's where our brains go when we're reflecting on real event things that have happened when we were younger. So this is why I wanted to do the video to bring a therapeutic voice into this, but obviously knowing that Jonny cannot provide therapeutic advice. So anything we are talking about, he's not advising you to do. We just really wanted to talk some about what it's like to have this theme and to help motivate you to seek treatment, knowing that treatment can be safe and that you can be in good hands. So I hope that that was a good enough explanation, but let's just kick it off. First of all, Jonny, let's talk about what it means when we say real event, as in reflecting on something that has happened in childhood. And let's give some examples.
Yeah, real event is the OCD term when we are triggered by things that happened in the past, and then we are getting the intrusive thoughts that we've done something bad, we're a bad person, the feelings, the memory, different ways the intrusive thought shows up, but it's pulling us back. And it often gets paired with false memory because there's a bit of a overlap, really. Like whenever I've worked with people with real event, there's always this aspect that they are reviewing the memory so much that they start to get confused about what actually happened. Their intrusive thoughts might be blending in and adding details or making them unsure about timelines or ages or things like that. So that's why in a lot of the books you see real event, false memory often paired together. That even in, there'll be people listening to this that will be saying, no, this thing did really happen. Well, often, even in those cases, there's an element of the confusion coming in from the compulsions of review and going over it. And then the false memory, the more typical false memory is things might not have even happened, but we're reviewing and going over the things that happened in the past, and intrusive thoughts are blending in. So yeah, I think you've obviously talked. You gave some great examples in the opening, and a lot of your material is some of the life-saving psychoeducation on this topic, and I've spoken to quite a few people directly that have said it's been life-saving. But I guess some of the examples you described, I mean, I see it a lot in the taboo OCD themes around sexuality. So there might be the pedophile themed OCD, the sexual orientation OCD, the sort of incest, things like that, when people have had, as you described, these experiences of child's play. And actually, just thinking of child's play, one statistics for you is 50% of children have been engaged in a sexual act before the age of 13.
Hmm.
So you can see, and that's an actual sexual act. We're not talking just inquisitively grabbing your brother's penis, or things that all kids do, really. If you've got kids, you see them naked in the bath and things like that. They're exploring their body, they're exploring other bodies. So this is actual sexual acts. So you can see that it's really, really common. And actually 17% are with siblings. So it's very common for it to be with siblings as well. So these are common, natural sexual development experiences that then OCD just grabs a hold of and uses as the evidence. We are a pedophile, an abuser, a rapist, whatever, deviant, and we can't live our life as you described so well. We can't move forward with this sort of thing holding over us. Um, I mean, I think you get it with all themes. You see it. I mean, I see it with sort of where people feel they've done harm to others, and examples of moral scrupulosity, examples of being a bad person in all kinds of different ways. The way I treat others. I've said something hurtful, I bullied people in the past, or things like that. So I would say almost all OCD themes have some version of real event, and sometimes I think it's when we're starting to challenge some of the intrusive thoughts in the present. It's like OCD checkmates us by going, but you did this thing in the past. So, okay, you're starting to go, what if? And you can move forward with the what ifs. Well, this isn't a what if, this is a you did. And
Yes.
you can't, and it's like checkmate that it does to push us into avoidance mode.
Because we often hear from, okay, so this is, ooh, I'm so glad that you said that because we often hear people saying, if you have OCD, you'll never act on it. You
Yeah,
know, this, and all of a sudden with real event, let's throw that out the window because I've
yeah,
already acted on it.
yeah,
This
yeah,
came before the theme, or I had the theme and, it wasn't, it was dormant or whatever. And then I had reflected back. Now people are going, that means I really don't have OCD because I did act on it.
yeah,
So
yeah,
no one's going to even believe I have OCD, A, and B, this is proof that I
yeah.
really am the horrible person that OCD and the world is telling me.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, and there's one framework for childhood sexual development that's used in the UK, which has like a green, an amber, and a red level of sexual behaviors. And I think what you see in OCD a lot is the green and the amber. I don't think you see the red because the red typically is very extreme stuff that goes with other mental health disorders, things which have low empathy. And, if you work with anyone with OCD, empathy is not a deficit. It's excruciating high levels of empathy. But the green level is really just all normal sexual exploration, very reciprocal. It can be everything from just curiosity as a young child and just exploring right through to the beginnings of sexual awakening and development and onwards. And then the amber is things that are a little bit more what might be called inappropriate for kids or for teens, but they're sort of acceptable within their peer group. They're not, they're quite mutual again, or that they're not done with this sort of intent to harm. Now, as I say this, obviously lots of people listening are going to be triggered and they're going to be thinking, he's saying I'm one of the reds. And so really watch that. Everything we say today, this is a classic topic that you could just be triggered the whole way through. So really catch that,
Like
try
I
to,
literally wrote that down.
yeah, yeah,
Say, you're going to be saying that this is
yeah,
not my OCD and that you're going to
yeah.
fit the mold that we're talking about.
Exactly, exactly. So if you're in that case, you've got to reach out to a clinician that knows Real Event, has worked with Real Event. You cannot be dealing with that on your own. If you're hearing my words now and thinking, oh God, I'm one of those reds. No, like you wouldn't be worried. Like the people who are
Here.
reds don't ruminate, don't have anxiety, don't have, impulse control. I mean, it's a different thing. But if you're triggered by what I'm saying, you've got to be in therapy. You've got to be working with, a clinician that gets Real Event. But normally, what we're seeing more is the greens, where people are doing these normal 50% sexual development stuff, and then they're judging it through this lens of like, it's appalling, no one else is doing this, I'm a terrible person. Then they're questioning their own intent and they're ruminating and worrying about that and getting all confused about what their motivation was and their intent was. And the compulsions drop the insight. They lose the insight about it because they're just compulsing so much. And I've worked with clients without OCD, who describe similar sorts of things and don't worry about them at all. And they might even feel some regret. They might even share like they had a sexual development experience that they feel embarrassed or a bit of regret about, but they're not compulsing. They're not going over and over and over. They forgive themselves. They can move on with their life. It's very different when it comes in the context outside of OCD, this sort of presentation.
Yes, and I do want to emphasize, not to belabor the point, but many people watching this and kind of probably came into the video watching this, came in to find out whether this is or isn't OCD and are
Mm-hmm,
taking words
mm-hmm.
very seriously. But I'm
Yeah.
here to tell you that no matter if you're in the green or the red, you're still going to think it's not OCD. It doesn't
Yes.
matter
Yes.
because this is
Yes.
And this isn't just about real OCD, real event OCD. This is about every single theme that we have.
Yeah.
OCD, we typically search and search to find what's going on, then we find out it's OCD, and then we search to find out that it's not OCD. It's the typical pattern.
Mm,
But I do
yeah.
think that real event can present just a a slight degree of accelerated shame. And
Yeah.
that's kind of my next question. A lot of things that people did or have experienced, and I'm one of those. I mean, I did weird sexual things as a kid. I look back on them with I look back more on like with it being cringy. Like I'll remember
Hmm.
like, oh God, like why? But then
Yeah.
again, I also keep into like kind of that objective context of I was a child and I didn't have that emotional
Yeah.
intelligence to understand.
Yeah.
And I just was very sexually explorative in really weird and bizarre ways that my family judged me for. But either way,
Yeah.
um, a
Well,
lot of
that's an important piece your family judge you for, right? That's something that goes into this
yes,
often is how did the adults react?
yes, it is.
Yeah.
Um, but a lot of things that people did do and are remembering doing can produce a lot of shame. If I were, well, I'm 48 now, and if I did some of the things that I did back then now, yes, it would be
Yeah.
wrong, or it would be against my values, or it just wouldn't be, right to the person that it was done to, or maybe
Mm,
even things when I was younger. I was big into masturbation when I was really young, and the
hmm.
fantasies that I would have, the things that I would think about, I look back now so cringy, so shameful,
Hmm.
how, but then again, so my whole point is there are things that maybe people have done that
Hmm.
warrant shame and guilt, right?
Yeah.
But two
Yeah. Yeah.
things can exist at once, right? So you can
Yes.
have
Yeah.
warranted shame and guilt, but you can also, but you can also have that regret and then decide that you can move forward. And
Mm,
that
mm,
was something that happened that isn't a reflection of who you are right
mm.
now.
Yeah.
I can tell this all day and every day to clients, and I can tell it to myself. Believing
Hmm.
it is a whole different ball game.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
are some of your thoughts on that?
Mm. Well, really, again, appreciate your honesty and sharing your experience, and it's so helpful for people. I think, OCD wouldn't be OCD if it wasn't convincing. If it didn't convince you that there's truth to it, it would just be intrusive thoughts like non-OCD people experience and can just dismiss. So it is always convincing, and that obviously ranges from mildly convincing to incredibly convincing, where you are just so sure that it's true. And so, just to validate that point you said, and then I think there are clients I work with where it's very mild behaviors that they are judging themselves incredibly harshly with, and some degree of psychoeducation to get someone ready to do ERP and to do treatment is necessary. I think this is one of the themes where the way it presents actually blocks people doing therapy because they don't think they're worthy of it or don't deserve it, or they're afraid it'll prove it's completely true or whatever it might be. So we got to understand the mechanisms. And if you've grown up in a culture that has really hidden away sex, or there's no normalizing of what Chrissy's, describing in natural exploration, natural stuff that kids do, everyone does. You need some level of like understanding of sexual development to realize that. Now, there'll be some people listening where they're more what you're describing, where there are things you regret. Now, we're not talking actual crimes,
Right.
again, that could be triggering, but they're things that people actually regret, and they're not proud of the power dynamic or the way they treated someone after the sexual encounter, or they might just not be sure. They're going over it so much they can't remember exactly what it felt like and what the dynamic was and the motivation is. And like you said, I mean, CFT, compassion focused therapy, has a nice way of explaining this. It talks about you have healthy guilt, unhealthy guilt, and shame. And you could add embarrassment because actually, what I would say you were talking about felt like embarrassment, actually, rather than shame. It doesn't sound like you think you are a not good enough or a bad person in the minds of others because of that. It's more like you're embarrassed about some of those early experiences, right? Whereas shame is like what many of our listeners will be experiencing, where it's like, I am bad and I'm bad in the minds of others because of this. So,
Or if they knew, I would be
yeah,
bad in the minds
or
of.
if they knew. So I'm imagining I would be bad in their
Yes.
minds. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, healthy guilt is like, I regret stuff, but I see a bigger picture. I see that, like, there weren't adults coaching me through this. It was, not a great culture of sexual education. I was a kid who was developing fast and, I maybe had things like ADHD or a higher sex drive or whatever it might be that made me more, curious about these things, natural things. I feel regret, but I know there was a bigger context, and I'm not a terrible person. I know that many other people have done this, but yeah, me now as my healthy adult now, I wouldn't do those things. But I can't judge that young developing kid, teenager who was going through a messy phase of life. um, then there's the unhealthy guilt where it's like, I'm taking all the responsibility. I don't see that bigger picture. And it's like, no, no, I should have known better and I shouldn't have done that. And a lot of shoulds. And then the shame is we extend that like, and I'm a bad person. I'm unworthy of love. I'm unworthy of a life. And this thing of either in the minds of others or how I imagine I would be seen in the minds of others. And I think understanding that spectrum, we're trying to get people. I mean, some people were trying to, normalize and get them out of this mechanism of mental review of the false memory. And then other people who really do feel they've done something they regret, it's trying to get it to a more healthy regret, that is more balanced and not judging from this incredibly um, judgmental place that you would never extend to other people.
Now, is that
You know.
something that can be attained by pulling the OCD out of it and looking at
Hmm.
that experience kind of without that? And that's the importance of the therapeutic alliance.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. I think there's different routes into that. I think one is, how do we get the compulsions down? If I take any memory from my life, if I just remember the meal I had today with my family, if I started going over that and questioning my intention and did I really want to eat that meal and blah blah blah, I do that long enough, I'm not really going to remember what happened and I'm not going to have a clear picture. So if we just get those compulsions down through response prevention, I use a lot of ACT skills and other things to help with that. We get that compulsion down. For some people, they'll actually see it more clearly and they'll get more insight on, this is like you're describing, these are just slightly awkward, cringy experiences. For other people, there's such a core of shame that I think much more self compassion is needed. That core of shame has come from somewhere in their past. So there's going to be often an invalidating environment, maybe trauma, maybe other things that has made that person really feel like I am not good enough. And then this OCD sticks to that more. It's like, I at my core, I feel I'm not good enough. And then I've got all these thoughts telling me I'm not good enough that stick more. And then I've got this memory as well, and it all sticks more because of that core of shame. So if we can strengthen that sense of self and sense of self-compassion, then it's easier to diffuse this stuff and to let it come and go, and for it to not hook in quite the same way. So that is through the therapeutic relationship, that non-judgmental, accepting, validating place, through targeted compassion practices, through working with the barriers to compassion, the things that come up, like I don't deserve it, or if I give myself it, maybe I'll become a bad person, all those sorts of things that come up. So I think I really feel you have to do the ERP, the response prevention, really work on the mental compulsions, and then also be doing self-compassion for these types of people. Because, the clients that I've had who've done the same things but don't have OCD often have a much stronger sense of self, and they kind of think of themselves as like, I'm good enough, I may not be perfect, but I'm a decent person in the world trying to do the best I can. And because of that, they're like, oh, it's cringy that I did those things, but it kind of washes over me. Whereas if I have this shame core and then I think about it, it's like it just proves what I feel in my heart based off everything I've learned throughout my life. Um,
Yeah, this is so helpful. And, again, to emphasize, if you're listening to this and you're thinking, but this is everybody else and not me, that's a normal thing to think with OCD.
yeah,
So if you're thinking that, it's probably
yeah,
likely OCD. But
yeah.
a couple of the takeaways that I'm hearing from you that's not only helpful to me, but even in thinking about how to support people who are going through this is the healthy guilt. I just never even knew that.
Mm,
And I think a lot of when I'm thinking about and conceptualizing this with OCD, the first thing I think is that people are going to go, but my upbringing was perfect. So this has
mhm,
to be me.
mhm,
Understand, listeners, your brain with OCD is always going to default to it's you and you're horrible and you're a bad person. Always. So that's
mhm,
where the
mhm.
pathway is leading. So if you're
Yeah,
saying that to yourself, of course you are, because that's what you've been telling yourself because of the
yeah.
influence of OCD. But I never even thought for a second, isn't this strange that I never thought this because it's so blatant? I never even thought, excuse me, that the lack of education around sex, the lack
Mhm,
of sex positive, just your upbringing, just the environment would have anything to do with the
mm,
guilt that you would feel around it. And it seems so obvious, but
mm,
it
mm.
doesn't when you are wrapped up in,
Yeah.
I have to resolve why I did this or else. It
Mhm,
isn't just
mhm,
about you. It's
mhm,
about the
mhm,
environment and the factors and everything that
mm,
led you to that decision and that maybe you regret now, or other things that may have happened. So
mm,
that is
mm,
really, I need to think on that
mm.
a little while, but it makes a lot of sense, and it also takes a lot of the blame
Yeah.
off of I must be a horrible person if I engaged in something like that. It certainly isn't saying that your parents are assholes and everybody in your life is assholes. That's not what
No,
it's saying, but that
no,
there are other
yeah,
factors
yeah.
of why.
Yes. Yes, yeah. Who was coaching kids through these periods? Like you can have lovely parents, but they carry their own intergenerational stuff around sex and shame about it. And that's, a very British thing. It's like a stereotype of British things, but it can be that thing like we just better not talk about it. And so these kids just they have no idea about this area of their life. How was if they were engaged in some sort of child's play, how did the adults respond when they found them? I've heard stories of adults going aggressive and shaming and shouting and discussing, especially when it was, like these parents or adults with homophobia or other ideas, coming in there, and it's kids just messing around with insect, with it might be a different sexual orientation to what they ended up with, but they have these judgmental adults around that completely shame them, or just no one talking about this stuff, or talking them through it. And um, I think it is important with clients like this to understand, what did they learn from their family system, their school system, their peers? What was the culture? If you grow up in a culture where it's completely normalized for all the guys the young teenage guys to just go after any girl they can at any, of course you're going to absorb that culture, and that's going to influence you. And so there's things, it's understanding like that wider picture of what might have caused it. And also like stuff you don't remember, how did your parents respond where you started exploring your own body? I mean, did they shame you from day one? Or,
Oh, yeah.
like what was the message from day one? And you won't even remember it probably. And, so it's this stuff is very important for, how do we learn to move on? And kids are different as well. Some kids, I mean, in some ways it comes down to things like if you've got higher testosterone for both men and or girls and boys, you're going to be more interested in sex sooner. And, if you have ADHD, hyperactive ADHD, you're going to be more interested in impulsive sexual behavior. There's all these sorts of factors that can feed in. And I think to de-shame it and to understand, um, but of course the doubt, I'm here in everyone's mind, like you are, the doubt will creep into everything we're saying, and we'll be saying like, why am I different to this? Why is it this not apply to me? But I haven't worked with a client that this stuff doesn't apply to. Um, so and they've come, and some of them have done stuff they regret. So I'm not talking just people with real event where it's like being really judgmental of very normal developmental behaviors. Like I have worked with people that really do regret things they've done, but again, it's over exaggerating like OCD does. It's like it wants you to back away from the threat completely. It's not happy for you to be just a meter away. It wants you to be in the other room and the other side of the country. So it exaggerates everything to get us to, avoid the threat. And at the core of this, it's like this social core fear of, if I've done something bad, I'll be rejected by my group, I'll be thrown out of my group, and a lone human's going to die. That early evolutional stuff is really at the core of this, I think. Or there's the
Yeah.
responsibility for ruining someone else's life. There's also that core fear that I've made someone else unhappy, and um, you know.
Yeah, and I actually I want to expand on that, and then I have
Hmm.
two more topics to cover, and then we'll wrap up. But the expansion on that would be in regard, well, first I just want to say, like, from reflecting from a young age, it was my household said absolutely no sexual, no masturbation, no anything. And so I grew up, I was just, I don't know what it was about my brain, but in third grade, that was what I did. It was actually
Hmm.
part of a compulsion for me. And
Yeah.
it was so secretive on the
Yeah.
chance of if anybody finds out. And so then
Hmm.
it became this source of shame. And then,
Yeah.
like, things I would think of, like as a young child, became this shameful thing. And so to this day, I still have to be mindful of the shame that comes along with sex and
Yeah.
orgasm and masturbating and all of that because it's so deeply
Mm.
ingrained because I
Yeah.
had to keep it a secret because I was
Yeah.
doing something wrong that was very natural for
Yeah.
me as a young child. So I appreciate you bringing that up. And,
Hmm.
I would encourage listeners to think about that in a way that is not, I have to solve it, what happened in my childhood,
Hmm.
but more of developing self-compassion around how you thought about sex. What were you taught about sex?
Yeah.
And maybe and then working with a therapist, how is that interacting with you reflecting on some of these things
Hmm.
that have happened to you or the real event things that have happened? So thank you for bringing all that up.
Yeah. 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 And thank you
But
for sharing.
on that
Mm.
vein, I also wanted to say, and I think this is important, people tend to think, and then I have 2 points before we wrap up. People tend to think, um, if just like you were talking about, like kind of this generational, like ingrained that we might have of if I do something wrong, I'm, pushed out of my tribe or I'm pushed out of my
And
family.
religion can get in there, right? Religion can
Oh
get in
gosh.
there a lot as well, obviously. Yeah. Mm.
So people, a lot of people that I talk with tend to have the desire to confess, the
Hmm. Hmm.
desire to share either with their families, and so the families will tell them they're not a monster or a deviant, or
Yeah.
tell them it was okay that that happened, or with their partner or like future husband or wife, I need
Yeah.
to share this with this person so they can make the decision whether they want to be with me. And
Hmm.
this
Hmm.
breaks my heart when I hear this, because I just want to be like, no, you're
Hmm.
like they whatever they think anyway isn't going to matter. You're not a bad person. But
Yeah.
B, what what is a good way to conceptualize all of this before you decide to
Mm.
confess?
Hmm. And people would do it in therapy. I've had clients that confession is a big compulsion, or actually I've had, people they'll do a single session with different therapists just to get, to tell them the real event and get the reassurance seeking from therapy. So that can happen.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to, with all compulsions, look at our experience throughout our life to learn that it isn't working for us because these people won't have confessed once, right? That, they'll have confessed multiple times. So it's about really trying to learn, OCD is forecasting the future and sometimes pulling in the past and trying to use imagination. We want to go back to actual experience, which is this does not work for me. It does not last. The doubt creeps back in. It creates pain for me and pain in my relationship. And, there's the risk with certain partners that aren't educated or have their own, shaming stuff going on that you could get a really negative counter message. And I hear from people who've had this from therapists where, non-OCD therapists have really sort of sort of entertain the fact that this was a terrible thing, or that this was some sort of deep drive, like some kind of psychodynamic drive or something that was, has really messed people up. So I think, we have to be honest. I think there's nothing wrong if you've never talked about this stuff before, going into therapy with an OCD specialist that has worked with Real Event multiple times. And I mean, I think you have to share this stuff as part of the therapeutic process, but then, that therapist is going to work with you to not confess and then to learn to extend that behavior outside a session. That confession is not going to work. But I think we have to catch that feeling of a compulsion, which is the urgency and the kind of itch that we need to scratch. And I have to do this, I have to do it. And I'm so hyper vigilant of like every aspect of their response. And also might be doing this subtly as well. And just like, oh, what would you think if someone had done this? And, to gauge responses. So we just have to be so honest that that is keeping us stuck. It's not working. It is, keeping us in the cycle.
And I think along with that, which is kind of bringing me to my next point, which I think is so important, is if someone chooses not to confess, and or if they do, and then it becomes kind of like that over and over and over confession. Um, Sometimes people will say, and even confession or not, people might say, because this happened, because I did this, because this is in my past, everything about my life is a reminder that I don't deserve happiness. And this can come in
Yeah.
any sort of form. And people could, and I've had this, so I can use my own examples of when I'm in a cycle like this about something that I'm reflecting on that I did that was awful or shameful and I haven't worked on it yet. I will laugh and go,
Hmm.
why are you laughing? You don't
Hmm.
deserve to laugh because of what you did to that person 10 years ago. Or, I'm going to bake cookies today. You don't deserve to eat cookies because you like them because of how horrible of a person you are. It is almost like the joy of the little
Mm,
parts of life are hijacked because
mm,
if you cannot reconcile this one thing, everything
mm,
about your life has to come to a halt because you
mm,
don't deserve. And this not only with Real Event, people who live with thoughts of pedophilia, taboo intrusive thoughts, incest, bestiality,
mm.
there is this degree of, if only these things didn't happen, I could
Yeah.
have a good life, but now I don't. So,
It's like a
oh,
contamination, right? It's like a moral or emotional
yes.
contamination of their life.
That
Yeah.
is. It is. So
Yeah.
I just
And
wanted to bring up that point because I think it's so
yeah.
important and people get so bogged down by this
Yeah.
deserving worthy piece.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's where hopefully working with a good therapist, you're going to eventually be encouraged to start doing compassionate, self-compassionate behaviors and starting to, the exposure could be to go and enjoy something. And then that judgmental voice of OCD comes in and says you don't deserve it. And you use your skills to get some distance from that thought and to stay enjoying stuff or to stay present with them, even if you can't enjoy it. And I think like all contamination stuff, we have to get comfortable with that unbearable feeling, able to be with it, and then to move forward in our life in order for our brain to go, oh, okay, maybe this isn't so important and we can, but we have to be, so you have to be able to feel like I can live my life in a values-based way, even with this feeling like it's all contaminated and I've ruined everything. And and in order to teach your brain that no, like healthy guilt, okay, at worst, healthy guilt is all I need here, not shame and self-punishment as a compulsion and all of this stuff.
I have never thought of it as contamination. Light bulb.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. I've heard other people say that as well. It really, it feels like that for people, and at its worst, it can drive people to feel suicidal, and I'm sure to be suicidal, obviously as well,
In
because they've
relationship,
just, yeah,
to
they,
not take job promotions, to not
yes,
get a job,
yes,
to stay
yes.
in a situation. It's self-punishment, which is also a compulsion.
Yes. Yeah, I've worked with people who are pretty much housebound because of this sort of stuff, and
Wow.
just everything shut down because of it. Um,
Wow.
yeah. So again, if you can, Chrissy's groups, places where you can meet other people that have experienced the same stuff. It's hard to share it, right? Even in a group, people won't always share the full extent of this stuff because they might share some of it, but this kind of thing could be really hard even in a group. But when they do, and when you get the experience of other people who've been through this, that you can see are kind, loving people that you have empathy
Right.
for, that can be helpful, I think, to go, well, maybe I could do treatment, maybe I do deserve it. um so yeah, I think it does block treatment though, which is really tough, really
Yes,
tough.
it does.
um
And I actually one more point until I actually want you to just expand and give us some final words on the treatment process and why people, even with these kind of themes, deserve treatment. But one more thing I really think is important to address is pornography. And this
yeah.
is, I mean, talk about how real event, false memory, everything possible. And this can occur years after watching one video and you didn't
Hmm.
even remember the video, and all of a sudden you've developed POCD, and
Hmm.
then you reflect back on, did that one porn video that I watched have someone underage? It can come with, I used to like incest porn, which by the way is like the
Hmm.
number one porn across the world. I used to
Yeah.
watch incest porn and now I have incest OCD. Was this a precursor to this? Did I cause it by watching that? Is this really? And so pornography can be a huge trigger for real event in reflection
mm,
of what you have
mm,
watched, as a reminder when you have a new theme.
mm, mm.
So just wanted to bring that up because I know that this is something that really digs down in that shame and guilt.
Yeah,
So what
yeah,
are your
yeah.
thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think a lot of the time, you have examples where people are engaging in, normal relationship with pornography, and then, they're overly judging that harshly, or they've stumbled upon something, sometimes by accident, or they just naively were a kid and didn't even consider things like age or other things within stuff, or the dynamics or whatever. Um, and I think there's another link to this theme is again in a de-shaming thing is often, nowadays we know kids are exposed to porn very early, and that can have an influence on that child's play. So sometimes people are
Yes.
experimenting with the stuff they've seen in porn, and
Yes.
sometimes they have seen that porn too young, really. They're 13 and younger, seeing that sort of stuff. And again, another place to de-shame and for self-compassion, that if you're acting stuff out. Also, trauma, it can happen, when people have experienced sexual abuse and they're reenacting stuff, or they get caught in dynamics that replicate or replay the trauma, and it's not their fault. They're unlucky and drawn into these things again. So I think there's that side of it. But yeah, certainly I've seen lots of people that are judging themselves for things they've looked at, again, things that people without OCD wouldn't bat an eyelid at and not even consider and even laugh at with their friends, at like, oh, that one time I watched that video and blah blah blah. And then people with OCD, it's like any evidence they can find, that they're a terrible person. So yeah, again, the main issue is the replaying, the reviewing, the going back over it, the compulsions of mental review.
Yeah. And so I wanted to bring that up. And especially if you're watching this and you're thinking to yourself, because I watched that, I don't deserve, this is the downfall of me. I mean, I tr very much try to normalize watching porn in the way
Mhm.
of majority of people do it.
Mhm.
At least
Yeah,
some point in their life, whether they're accidentally exposed or they want to do it. This is a huge industry, and OCD is like celebrating over there when you're watching porn because it knows it can just take anything and everything
yeah,
porn and turn the volume up with,
yeah.
anxiety and any sort of mentally reviewing about things that you've watched. So you are not alone if you have engaged in watching porn and now it is coming back in the way of you needing to mentally review to find out whether you did or did not do something wrong and if this is intertwining with your OCD. It is so common.
Mm. Yeah, an ERP with a good therapist is going to be reclaiming this part of your life, whether it's your own, masturbation or whether it's intimacy with others, that's going to be part of like how like people shut that down and people avoid all that domain of their life. So often I'm working with people of how do you re-engage with that part of your life?
Absolutely.
Um, mm,
So, lastly, and I just want to thank you all for being here and watching through this. I do know that we did not get to every possible thing that has to do with Real Event and all this. There's so much more your brain is going to tend to want to go to. You did not mention this. This means this does not apply to me, but please take this video for what it is in your own experience. We are here to let you know that you're not alone and that this is really common. And you're not going to find a lot of information online about some of these things that we talk about, but that it is safe to come talk to people like us. We are not going to judge you. We are not going to hear what you've done or what has happened to you and be like, oh my gosh, this, I
mm,
can't believe you did this and you're a horrible person. That's not what we do. And
mm,
so I wanted to kind of hand it over to you, Jonny, and kind of leave a message for people who are really struggling with this and they're struggling with that first step of I want to reach
mm.
out, but I'm too scared. What can you
Yeah.
tell people to give them some motivation and some hope to know that they don't have to feel that way and that they can be safe?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, one thing I wanted to say was I think also some of the articles on Real Event will present very vanilla versions of it. So they'll present like, oh, I was mean to a childhood friend, or, I did a bit of touching myself in the bath. Like, and then
I
people will read
killed an
that
ant.
stuff. Yeah, I killed an ant. And people will go, oh, well, that's not me. No, I actually did something bad. So, really watch
Yes.
out for that because, people aren't, Chrissy is courageously talking about this stuff, but a lot of people are just recycling the same examples and quite mild stuff. And of course, it can show up in that mild way. But there's a lot of people that have genuine stuff they feel regret about. And that's where, we want to go after that healthy regret, not OCD, guilt, shame, self-punishment, that extreme, end. We're trying to go for that. You can have healthy regret and seek therapy and work that through. So yeah, I would say, you are worthy of recovery. Your brain will tell you this is different to other OCD. It isn't. You're forgetting how much doubt you were in other themes. It's just the same. OCD will always find the checkmate, and here it's saying because you did something, but other times it'll be because you felt something in your body or because you tested something in your brain and liked it, and it'll find checkmates. It always finds checkmates.
Yeah.
So, we gotta not see it. And you can go into therapy and you can take your time. I've had clients that haven't shared the Real Event for quite a bit of time, to be honest. And we build up a connection, they built trust, they've kind of gradiated what they've talked about really and talked about a bit more OCD, a bit more OCD. Same with POCD, things like that. It might take a bit of time to disclose that. So you can go and you can take your time. Just make sure someone is an OCD specialist and they do know about Real Events. So you speak to them, call them or email them and really make sure they've worked with Real Event and they get it and
Yes.
understand it. And then, you can take your time and gradually share a bit more and see the response and just make sure it fits with everything we're saying here. And normally it's a very validating and hopeful thing when people share it and they realize that actually there is a chance to move forward in life and um, forgive themselves and be self-compassionate and reconnect with people. So yeah, I would say that, just take your time with it. Clinicians should be assessing, clinicians should be asking the right questions. They should be saying, when someone's talking about POCD, they should be saying, well, often people have had experiences in their history that they're feeling guilt about, like child's play. And, they should be suggesting these things that then make it easier
Right.
to disclose it.
Right.
And you can share to someone how scared you are about disclosing it and how difficult it is to do that. And if they're a good therapist, they should help you with
Right. And that you're afraid of the repercussions of sharing it, which is
that.
what a
Yeah,
lot of
yeah,
people are.
yeah.
And yeah, just to conclude, Jonny, can you let people, first of all, you're at the Integrative Center for OCD in the UK, but can you share your YouTube channel with us?
Yes, I'm Jonny Say Therapy on YouTube. Yeah, and anyone feel free to reach out. I'm responsive there in Instagram, and I respond to emails and things as well. So yeah, anyone reach out. I'm very happy to provide any ideas I can.
Excellent. Jonny, stay on after we stop recording.
Will do.
For
Will do.
those of you that are listening, thank you so much for being here. I'm so sorry that you were going through this, if this resonated with you, because I know that this is so difficult and can be so shameful. But I hope that you've learned something during this. I know that I did, and I hope that you know that regardless of what has happened or what you've been through with this, you can get help and you can seek help and understanding and that you deserve it and that you're worthy. I know it's hard to hear that and to believe that, but sometimes you have to put it into action in order to see that you do believe it. And this is a first step, seeing two people that can sit here and say that you are and that you are safe to reach out. To find out more about my services, groups, my online community, where you can find so many people who completely understand this and you can really start to learn how to develop self-compassion through having compassion for others who've experienced it. Go to chrissyhodges.com, and for therapy and resources from NoCD, head on over to treatmyocd.com. And thank you, Jonny, for being here. And thank you to all the listeners. And I hope this was helpful, and we'll see you next time.